The storm had been building for hours. A Tennessee night, heavy with rain and the smell of iron in the air. The year was 1843, and on the far end of the Chamberlain plantation, every soul could feel something was wrong. Thunder rolled over the fields like cannon fire. The slaves in the quarters whispered prayers, clutching their children close. Even the horses refused to sleep. And inside the great house, 26-year-old Elias Chamberlain sat alone in his study, pretending not to hear the storm. He was the son of Master William Chamberlain, a man known from Georgia to Mississippi for his cotton and his cruelty. Elias had inherited his father's sharp eyes and his mother's quiet soul. He hated the plantation, but had never found the courage to leave it. That night, he would learn why. As lightning cut across the window, he heard it, a single, frantic knock. Then another, and another. Knock, knock, knock. Elias frowned. No one came to the main house after dark. He rose from his chair, lantern in hand, and moved toward the front door. The knocking grew more desperate, almost like sobbing between each strike. He opened the door, and the storm rushed in. Standing there was a young slave girl, no older than 10, barefoot, drenched, mud streaked across her arms and face. Her thin dress clung to her skin, torn at the shoulder. Her eyes, large and glassy, met his. "Mr. Elias," she stammered, He killed my mama." Elias blinked, unsure he'd heard right. "What did you say, child?" She shook her head, trembling so violently the lantern light flickered over her face. "Master killed my mama, in the barn." The words hit him harder than the thunder outside. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Hattie." Her lips quivered as she spoke again, voice breaking. "She didn't do nothing wrong. He said she was talking too much. Then he took her to the barn. I heard her scream, 'Mr. Elias.' I heard her scream, and then it stopped." Elias stepped forward, trying to calm her, but she flinched back. That's when he saw them. The rope burns around her wrists deep and raw, and on her small hands streaks of blood, not her own. He felt his stomach twist. His father was strict, brutal at times, but murder. "Where's your mama now, Hattie?" he asked quietly. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He buried her there." Lightning split the sky, flooding the porch in white light. For an instant, Elias thought he saw something behind her, a dark outline near the tree line. A figure watching. Then the light faded and there was only rain. He swallowed hard. "Come inside," she hesitated. "He'll know." "Not tonight." Elias took her small hand and pulled her in, shutting the door behind her. The storm roared against the wood, as if angry to be kept out. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, poured her water, and crouched to her level. "You said the barn, yes?" Hattie nodded. Elias felt the weight of the name Chamberlain pressing on his chest. His father's barn had stood for generations, a place where livestock was kept, cotton was stored, and punishments were carried out. He grabbed his lantern and a raincoat. "Stay here," he said, but she rose instantly. "I'm coming too," she whispered. Elias wanted to refuse, but something in her eyes stopped him. She'd already seen more horror than he could imagine, and somehow he knew she would lead him to the truth. Together, they stepped back into the storm. Rain hammered the dirt path as they crossed the yard, the wind cutting through the trees like screams. The barn loomed in the distance, a black silhouette against the lightning. When they reached the doors, Elias pushed them open. The hinges groaned long and painful. Inside, shadows danced along the beams, and the air reeked of mold, straw, and something far worse, the faint metallic scent of blood. The horses shifted nervously in their stalls. One snorted, eyes rolling back. Hattie clutched Elias's coat. "She's here," she murmured. "Right here." He lifted the lantern higher. The light trembled over the wooden floorboards. Across the tools hanging from the wall, a whip, a shovel, a length of rope still damp from rain. In the far corner, he saw it, a mound of fresh earth beneath a pile of hay. Too fresh, the kind of soil that had been disturbed recently. He turned to Hattie. "Who buried her?" Her lips moved soundlessly for a moment before she whispered, "He did." Elias's breath caught. He looked back at the mound, feeling something ancient and awful stirring in the pit of his stomach. The thunder cracked again, and for a split second, the light from the lantern flickered across the wooden post, revealing dark stains. Dried, faded, but still visible. He touched the wall. The marks were handprints, small ones, smeared into the wood like silent screams. He stepped closer to the mound, setting the lantern down. The soil was loose. He reached for the shovel, but Hattie stopped him. "No," she said, shaking her head. "He'll see." Elias didn't understand. Who will see? But before she could answer, a gust of wind swept through the barn, snuffing the lantern flame. The world plunged into darkness. He froze. For a moment, he could swear he heard something. Not the wind, not the storm, but a voice. A woman's voice, low broken, calling his name. Then the voice was gone, leaving only rain against the roof and the sound of Hattie crying softly behind him. Elias relit the lantern with shaking hands, staring at the mound again. The fresh soil seemed to breathe, as if something underneath it had just shifted. His chest tightened. He looked at Hattie, and saw it in her eyes. She wasn't lying. Whatever his father had done, it was buried right there, and by dawn, the truth would not stay buried for long. The storm had quieted by dawn, but the silence that followed was worse. The kind of silence that doesn't rest. It waits. Elias Chamberlain hadn't slept. The girl Hattie lay curled by the hearth, shivering in her damp dress. Every so often she whispered her mother's name in her sleep. Lila, Lila. The name lingered in Elias's head long after the fire died. He tried to tell himself it was madness. That a frightened child had misunderstood something, a punishment gone wrong, a runaway accident. But his father's shadow loomed in every corner of that house, whispering, "You know what I'm capable of." By sunrise, Elias couldn't bear it any longer. He lit his lantern again. "Come," he said quietly. "We're going to the barn." Hattie's eyes opened slowly, wide and fearful. "He'll be there." Elias hesitated. "Who?" She swallowed hard. "Master." He looked out the window. His father's horse was gone from the stable, the trail of hooves leading toward the lower fields. "Then we won't be seen." The rain had left the air heavy and sour. Mist curled along the ground as they crossed the yard. Every step toward the barn felt heavier than the last. The building stood hunched in the distance, like an animal guarding its secrets. When Elias pulled open the door, the smell hit first. Earth, rot, and something faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in water. The horses inside were uneasy, hooves scraping the floor, heads tossing. One snorted, staring toward the corner where the soil was still dark. Hattie pointed with a shaking hand. "There." Elias stepped closer, the lantern light quivering against the walls. He could see it clearly now, a patch of disturbed ground, the straw roughly thrown over it. He knelt, brushing the hay aside. The soil was damp and loose. He hesitated only a moment before digging. His fingers sank into the mud, cold and thick. Hattie began to hum softly, a tune low and sorrowful, the kind sung in the quarters when someone died. It was the same melody that had echoed in his dreams all night. Minutes passed. His nails filled with dirt. Then at something hard, he froze, pushed away more earth. What emerged from the ground wasn't a rock. It was a fragment of bone, smooth, pale, human. Elias recoiled, breath catching. Dear God. He dug again, faster this time, the lantern flickering wildly. A skull surfaced, its jaw half buried, empty sockets staring up at him. But the horror didn't stop there. Beside it lay another. And another, 3 skulls. Their teeth clenched as if they had died screaming. Elias stumbled back, mud on his hands, bile rising in his throat. This isn't possible. Hattie's eyes glistened. He put them all here. Elias looked at her, voice trembling. All who? Her answer came soft, almost inaudible. The ones who tried to run. The ones who said no. The words struck him like thunder. The lantern light shuddered as if reacting to her voice. Elias turned toward the wall and saw something new. Dark stains, smeared into the boards in uneven patterns. Handprints, dozens of them. some small like a child's, some large and crooked. He moved the light closer. Beneath one handprint, burned into the wood, were the letters CM, his father's initials. Chamberlain, William. He dropped the lantern. It hit the dirt, rolling, spilling oil. The flame licked at the straw, spreading fast. Panic seized him as he smothered it with his coat, coughing as smoke rose around him. When the fire died, the marks on the wall glowed faintly in the soot, as if the wood itself remembered. Elias sank to his knees. The truth was no longer deniable. His father hadn't just punished these people. He had executed them, and buried their bodies beneath the same roof that sheltered his wealth. Behind him, Hattie whispered, "She told me to find you." He turned sharply. "Who told you that?" "My mama," Hattie said. Before she went quiet, she said, "Find Elias. He's not like him." Elias's breath caught. "Why me?" She said, "You'd see it. You'd see what he'd done." Her words cut through the fog in his head. He had always known something was rotten in his father's heart, but not this. Not murder. Not ritual. The lantern's dying light cast strange shadows across the barn floor, bending the lines of the beams until they looked almost like ribs, the inside of something alive. And then came a sound. Not the wind. Not the horses. It was a low creak from somewhere beneath the soil. Like the ground itself shifting, Elias froze. The lantern flickered again, and for a heartbeat he saw it. A faint impression in the dirt near the skulls. A handprint, fresh, smaller than his own. He stumbled back, heart hammering. Hattie clutched his arm. "Do you see her?" she whispered. The air in the barn turned colder. The horses screamed. Elias grabbed Hattie's hand and dragged her out into the open air, the storm clouds breaking again above them. They didn't stop until they reached the steps of the house. Elias collapsed against the railing, rain soaking his clothes. Hattie stood beside him, eyes still locked on the barn. "You can't tell him," she said. "He'll make you disappear too." Elias stared at her, unable to speak. The girl's words echoed through the rain. "He'll make you disappear too." He looked toward the horizon where the plantation fields stretched wide and endless. And for the first time in his life, the land his family built looked like a graveyard. In his chest, something shifted, a mixture of rage, sorrow, and fear. He knew what had to come next. He had to face the man who built this hell. The storm that had threatened all evening finally broke as Elias Chamberlain approached the main house. Rain slashed across the veranda, thunder growling in the distance like a warning. He moved quickly, mud thick on his boots, the lantern in his hand throwing fractured light through the sheets of rain. Every step felt heavier than the last. His heart was still racing from what he had seen in the barn, the blackened stains, the faint smell of decay that no storm could wash away. Inside the house, everything was unnaturally quiet. The wind pressed against the shutters, and the fire in the parlor burned low, throwing long skeletal shadows across the walls. Elias paused at the door, his hand trembling slightly before he pushed it open. His father, Jonathan Chamberlain, sat in his high-backed chair, a glass of bourbon in hand. The old man's posture was calm, composed, almost regal. But when his eyes lifted to meet Elias's, there was something ancient and cold behind them. Something that made Elias's stomach turn. "Back from the barn, are you?" Jonathan said, his voice steady but sharp, like the crack of a whip. "I told you not to wander out there after dark." Elias swallowed hard. "There's something you didn't tell me, Father. Something about Mama, about what happened out there." Jonathan's hand froze mid-air, glass half raised. For the briefest moment, the mask slipped. A flicker of something, fear, rage, regret, crossed his face before he set the glass down carefully. The sound of crystal meeting wood was deafening in the silence. "You've been listening to the girl," he said finally, his tone measured but tight. "You let her fill your head with ghost stories." Elias stepped closer, his voice shaking. "She wasn't lying. I saw the marks. I saw the blood. You told me Mama died of fever, but there's enough." Jonathan's voice thundered, filling the room. "You will not question me in my own house." But Elias didn't stop. "Did you kill her, Father?" he demanded. "Did you kill my mother in that barn?" The silence that followed was suffocating. The only sound was the rain hammering against the windows. Jonathan rose slowly, his shadow stretching long across the floor. "You don't understand what that woman was," he said, voice low and trembling with something dark. "She wasn't your mother." Elias blinked, disoriented. "What are you talking about?" Jonathan turned away, pacing toward the fireplace. "Your real mother, your birth mother, died before you could even walk. The woman you called Mama was a replacement, a servant, a girl from the fields who looked enough like her to quiet the gossip. I needed a mother in the house, a woman who could hold the image of respectability. But she forgot her place. She forgot who she belonged to." Elias's knees nearly gave out. "You're lying," he whispered. "I gave her everything." Jonathan continued, staring into the flames. "Clothes, a room, a name, and she repaid me with betrayal. She tried to run, tried to take something that wasn't hers." Elias felt sick. "So you killed her?" Jonathan turned then, his face contorted in a terrible mix of pride and fury. "She forced my hand. She was going to take you from me. You were mine, my blood, my legacy. I couldn't let her poison you with lies." Elias's heart pounded in his chest. "And the others?" he asked, his voice cracking. "The graves behind the barn? Were they lies too?" For the first time, Jonathan looked shaken. His hand twitched slightly at his side. "You shouldn't have gone out there," he murmured. "Those are old things, things buried for a reason. You think you want the truth, boy, but you don't. You can't carry it." Elias took another step forward, his breath ragged. "Tell me everything. Every name, every grave." Jonathan's eyes glinted like steel. "You think you're different from me?" he hissed. "You wear a clean shirt, go to church on Sunday, and think you've washed away the blood. But this land is ours because of what I did. Everything you own, everything you are, built on that barn." The words hit Elias like a blow. His father's voice had never sounded so monstrous. Then, somewhere outside, lightning split the sky. And for an instant, Elias saw something move past the window, a figure in white. Drenched in rain, her face turned toward the house. He blinked, and she was gone. Jonathan noticed his reaction and smiled, a terrible, knowing smile. "She comes sometimes," he said softly. "The one from the barn? I told you, son, some ghosts don't stay buried." Elias's blood turned cold. He backed away, trembling. "You're insane." Jonathan's voice dropped to a whisper. "Insane? No, Elias, just chosen. Chosen to bear the weight of our name. And now it's your turn." Elias turned and ran, his boots slipping on the wet floorboards. Behind him, his father's laughter followed, low and broken, echoing through the house like the cry of something no longer human. Outside, the storm swallowed him whole. He didn't stop running until he reached the barn again, his lantern barely clinging to life. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old blood and rain. And then faintly he heard it, soft, uneven breaths. He turned the light toward the corner. The slave girl was there, huddled beneath the beam, her hands covering her ears, whispering something again and again. "He's not done," she murmured. "He said the ground isn't full yet." Elias knelt beside her, shaking. "What do you mean?" She looked up at him, her eyes wide and glistening. "He buries them when they scream, but some don't stay quiet." A chill passed through Elias's bones. Outside, thunder rumbled again, and the barn door creaked open, as if by an unseen hand. He looked into the darkness beyond, and for the first time, he understood his father's words. The land itself was alive with the weight of its sins. The rain had stopped by the time Elias Chamberlain returned to the barn. The air was heavy, humid, and thick with the stench of wet soil and decay. The storm had passed, but the world felt no cleaner. It was as if the land itself had exhaled its sickness into the night, leaving behind a silence that pressed against the ears. Elias stood at the barn doors for a long time before pushing them open. The hinges groaned, their cry echoing through the dark interior. Inside, the shadows seemed deeper than before, layered upon themselves like the folds of some ancient shroud. The flicker of his lantern struggled to reach the farthest corners. Dust and hay floated in the stale air like drifting ash. The slave girl was still there, curled in the straw, her eyes hollow and unblinking. She looked more like a ghost than a living child. When Elias approached, she didn't flinch. She only spoke, voice thin as thread. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "He's still watching." "Who?" Ilias asked softly. "My father." She shook her head. "The others." "The ones beneath." Ilias crouched beside her. "What do you mean, the others?" The girl looked toward the center of the barn floor, to the dark patch where the ground was uneven, slightly raised, as if something had swelled beneath it. "He buried them here," she said. "All the ones who didn't do what he said." A tremor went through Ilias's hands. He lifted his lantern higher and moved to the center of the barn. The ground there looked different, darker, disturbed. The scent of damp earth and rot grew stronger with each step. He set the lantern down and grabbed a rusted spade leaning against the wall. The wood felt soft, nearly rotted through as if it had been used too many times. He hesitated only a moment before pressing it into the soil. The first slice of the blade made a wet, sucking sound. The girl began to cry quietly behind him. Ilias dug deeper. Every few inches, the dirt changed color, from brown to black, from black to something that smelled of death. His hands blistered. His breath came ragged, and the lantern light shook with every movement. Then the shovel hit something hard. He knelt and brushed the dirt away with trembling fingers. What he uncovered was not wood, but bone, smooth, curved, unmistakable. A human skull. He staggered back, choking on the sour air. For a long moment he could only stare. Then he forced himself forward again, scraping away more of the earth. Another skull, then another. Smaller ones. He counted silently in his head until the numbers lost meaning. Some still had fragments of cloth or hair clinging to them. One was bound at the wrists. His chest tightened. The barn spun around him. He could hear his father's voice echoing in memory. "This land is ours because of what I did." Ilias collapsed to his knees, hands shaking violently. "Dear God," he whispered. "How many?" The girl's voice trembled through the darkness. 73, he turned to her sharply. "How do you know that?" She pointed toward the far wall, where the shadows seemed deeper still. "He counted them every time. Said 73 made him whole." Ilias swallowed hard. He picked up the lantern and walked toward that shadowed corner. The wood planks there looked newer, paler than the rest of the barn. Fresh nails glinted in the lantern light. He reached out and touched one. It was still cold. He pried at the boards with the end of the spade until one cracked loose. Behind it was another hollow space, smaller, tighter, filled with straw and the faint glint of metal. Inside was a box. He dragged it out and set it down. It was an old chest, the kind used to store tools or family documents, but this one was different. The lid was carved with strange markings, circles, crosses, and what looked like letters, though none Ilias could recognize. His heart hammered as he opened it. Inside were relics, locks of hair tied with ribbons, pieces of torn fabric, small wooden carvings, and bones wrapped in linen. At the very bottom lay a journal bound in cracked leather and stained with age. He opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was his father's. The first page was dated May 12, 1841. The words were uneven, hurried, as if written in feverish haste. "They won't stay quiet. The earth rejects them. I hear them every night beneath the floor. Their whispers crawl up through the wood. I tried prayer. I tried fire. Nothing silences the dead." Ilias turned the pages, his pulse quickening. Each entry grew darker, more desperate. "She saw me. The girl in the barn. She said my sin would walk with me in the blood of my son. The ground will not rest. The 73rd must be buried by my own hand. Then maybe she will stop coming." The final page was dated March 3, 1846. The ink was smeared, but the words were legible. "I see her eyes in every flame. She stands in the corner of my room, smiling. She will take him next. She will take my boy." Ilias closed the book, his hands trembling. A sound rose from the dirt behind him, a faint creak, like wood bending under pressure. He turned sharply. The disturbed soil was shifting. Something beneath it was moving. He stumbled back, nearly dropping the lantern. The earth swelled, split, and the smell of death flooded the air. Then, in a slow, dreadful motion, a pale hand broke through the surface, small, skeletal, clutching for the light. The slave girl screamed. Ilias grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door, but as they ran, the barn seemed to breathe. The walls groaned, dust rained from the rafters, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. From beneath the floorboards came the low, muffled sound of voices, dozens of them whispering, crying, calling his name. Elias. Elias. He burst through the barn doors, dragging the girl into the open air. The rain had begun again, soft and steady, like the weeping of the heavens. The lantern shattered behind them, flames licking the straw, catching the timbers. Within seconds the barn was burning. He fell to his knees, clutching the girl to his chest, watching as the fire consumed the place that had birthed his family's wealth and their damnation. The girl looked up at him through the smoke and whispered, "Now they're awake." The morning after the fire, the Chamberlain plantation smelled of smoke and guilt. The barn was nothing but a heap of blackened timbers, charred bones of wood jutting upward like fingers reaching for mercy that never came. The flames had died with the dawn, but the heat still hung in the air, thick, suffocating, and alive. Elias stood barefoot in the ash, his eyes hollow from the night. His clothes were scorched, his hands blistered, but he didn't move. The rain had returned sometime before sunrise, hissing against the smoldering remains, sending up steam that curled through the fields like lost spirits. Behind him, the mansion loomed silent, its white columns streaked grey by soot. Servants whispered from the verandas, eyes wide with fear, not daring to ask questions. In the distance, the overseers kept to the shadows, their faces pale. They had seen the fire from their cabins. They'd heard the screams, but no one knew what Elias had seen inside that barn. No one but the trembling slave girl, who now stood at the edge of the clearing, barefoot and shivering, her small hands clutching a broken rosary. Her name was Hattie. He knew it now. Elias turned to her, his voice hoarse. "They're gone," he said, though the words felt like a lie. "It's over." Hattie shook her head. "No, sir," she whispered. "They're still here." He looked back toward the ruins. The smoke rising from the wreckage twisted in strange shapes, curling and bending like it carried faces. For a moment, Elias could swear he saw eyes within it, hundreds of eyes watching him through the haze. Then a voice tore through the silence behind him. "What have you done?" William Chamberlain's voice was deep, commanding, the kind that had ruled men for decades. He strode across the wet grass, his boots sinking into the mud, fury etched into every line of his face. His nightshirt was half-buttoned, his eyes bloodshot with drink and sleeplessness. "Father," Elias began, but William cut him off with a roar. "You burned it?" His voice cracked the morning like thunder. "You burned my barn." "Do you know what you've done, boy?" Elias faced him, trembling but resolute. "I found what you buried," he said quietly. "The graves, the bones, your ledger." William froze mid-step. His eyes narrowed. "You went into my office." "I know everything," Elias said. His voice shook, but he didn't look away. "I know about her, about what you did to that woman, to all of them." For a long, terrible moment, the only sound was the rain hissing against the smoldering ruins. Then William laughed. It wasn't the laugh of a man, it was the sound of something breaking inside him. "You think you've uncovered some sin?" He sneered. "You're too young to understand. This land was bought with sweat, blood, and obedience. That's what keeps the soil rich. That's what keeps our name strong." Elias felt a sickness rise in his throat. "You murdered them," he said. William's expression darkened. "I fed this land, and in return it fed you. The cotton in your shirts, the roof over your head. It all came from the ground beneath our feet. And sometimes," he said, stepping closer, "the ground needs feeding." Elias stumbled back, horrified. "You're insane," William's eyes gleamed. "No, boy, I'm a realist. God helps those who take what they're owed." He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "You've set something loose, Elias. That fire didn't burn away your guilt. It called them home." A gust of wind blew through the clearing, scattering ash into the air. The black flakes clung to their faces like fingerprints. The smell of burnt hay and bone filled Elias's lungs. From the corner of his vision, he saw Hattie staring at the ruins, her lips moving soundlessly. Then, faintly, just faintly, he heard humming. It was the same tune Hattie had sung the night before when she'd spoken of her mother. Soft, haunting, impossible to place, but now it came not from her, but from the ashes. The melody drifted through the smoke, rising and falling like breath. William turned, his face paling. "You hear that?" he muttered. Elias nodded slowly. The humming grew louder. Then came the sound of something cracking, wood splintering beneath the ash. A section of the collapsed barn shifted, sending a plume of soot spiraling into the air. The smell of burnt flesh rose with it. Hattie clutched Elias's arm. "She's still there," she whispered, William's face contorted in rage and fear. "Enough of this nonsense." He turned toward the mansion. "You'll say nothing of this to anyone, do you hear me? Not the overseers, not the preacher, no one. You'll tell them it was lightning that took the barn. That's all." Elias didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the ruins. Beneath the rising smoke, he thought he saw movement again, a shape struggling against the embers. For one impossible heartbeat, it looked like a woman crawling toward them, her charred hands reaching out. William didn't look back. He stormed away toward the mansion, his voice echoing across the fields. "If you open your mouth, boy, I'll have that girl whipped until she can't stand." Elias turned sharply. "You touch her and I'll kill you." William stopped. The words hung heavy in the air. Slowly he turned his head, studying his son with cold, unblinking eyes. "Careful, Elias," he said softly. "You're starting to sound like one of them." And then he was gone, disappearing into the mist. Elias knelt beside Hattie, his heart pounding. She looked up at him, tears cutting clean lines through the soot on her cheeks. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Not until the name is gone." That night, as darkness settled over the ruined barn, Elias sat in his room, the smell of smoke still clinging to his hair. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces in the fire. Hollow eyes, burned mouths, reaching hands. Then came a knock at his window. He turned slowly. Outside, through the glass, stood the faint silhouette of a woman. Her skin was grey, her eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. She raised one blackened hand and pressed it against the window. The glass fogged where her fingers touched. Elias froze. Then her lips moved. Though no sound came, he could read the words. "Not done." The window pane cracked. Elias fell backward, gasping. When he looked again, she was gone. Only 5 black fingerprints remained on the glass, fading like breath. By the 3rd night after the fire, no one on the Chamberlain plantation slept. The workers whispered of shadows moving through the cotton fields, of whispers slipping through cracks in the cabins like the hiss of snakes. Cows refused to eat, dogs howled at empty air, and the smell of smoke clung to everything, clothes, bedsheets, even breath. Elias hadn't slept either. His eyes were red, his hands raw from clutching the charred ledger he'd salvaged from the barn. The ink had bled in places, but the names remained, 73 of them, each followed by a mark. Beside the last, his father had scrawled a single word, "Unfinished." He stared at it until dawn, when the decision formed like iron in his chest. That morning, Elias rode into town. He returned with 3 men. The preacher, Reverend Collins, whose faith had begun to wither under William Chamberlain's shadow, and 2 overseers, Samuel Pike and Jacob Thorne, men hardened by violence but uneasy in their own skin. When Elias asked for their help, none of them looked him in the eye. They knew something evil lived beneath that land. By dusk, the sky burned red over the fields. The air was thick, too still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Elias stood outside the mansion steps, his father's pistol holstered at his hip, and said only, "We're going to the barn." William laughed when he saw them approaching. He sat on the porch, a glass of bourbon in one hand, the other resting lazily on his cane. "Ah," he said, rising. "You've brought an audience. What is this, a sermon or a mutiny?" "Neither," Elias said coldly. "A reckoning." William's eyes flickered. "You dare speak to me like—" "Enough," Elias snapped. "You'll come to the barn, now." For a long moment, father and son locked eyes. Then William smiled, a cruel, weary smile. "So be it," he said, and followed. The walk to the ruins was silent except for the crunch of boots on damp earth. Hattie followed from a distance, her small figure half hidden in the mist. The preacher clutched his Bible so tightly that his knuckles turned white. When they reached the barn, Elias stopped, or rather what was left of it. The blackened skeleton of the structure jutted up from the ground like the ribs of some colossal beast. Smoke still curled from the earth. The air was thick with the metallic scent of burned blood. William sneered. "You dragged me here for this? You think I fear ashes?" Elias stepped closer. "This is where you made them suffer. You buried them here. You kept count." He held out the ledger. 73. William's expression didn't change. "And confess," Elias said. His voice trembled with rage. "Before God and before the people you used." The preacher raised his Bible, his voice quivering. "Mr. Chamberlain, the Lord sees all deeds, even those hidden beneath the earth. Speak your truth, lest it damn your soul." William's lips curled into a grin. "My soul?" He laughed, deep and hollow. "You think I fear damnation, preacher? I built this land with my own hands. Every man, woman, and child who lived here ate from my table. They were mine. And you—" He turned to Elias, his eyes narrowing. "You are mine." Something in Elias broke. He stepped forward, pistol drawn, his hand shaking. "No, father," he said softly. "I was never yours." The wind shifted. The smell of rot and smoke thickened. Somewhere deep in the earth, a low groan sounded, like wood bending under weight. William's face paled. He looked around, eyes darting. "What was that?" The preacher stepped back. "Lord have mercy." Then the ground shuddered. A tremor ran through the ruins, sending ash swirling into the air. The wind rose into a howl, cold and sharp, though the night was still. The charred beams of the barn creaked and shifted, as if something were moving beneath them. Elias's lantern flickered, sputtered, then flared bright, too bright. The shadows of the men stretched across the ground, twisted and elongated. From the smoke rose a sound. A whisper at first, then a chorus of voices, dozens, hundreds. "William." The overseers stumbled backward, their faces pale. Samuel muttered a prayer under his breath. The whisper grew into a wail, a raw, aching sound that seemed to come from beneath the earth. The ground split. A faint red glow seeped through the cracks, pulsing like a heartbeat. William's breath quickened. "Stop this," he hissed. "You don't know what you're doing." Elias raised the ledger, his voice shaking. "You wrote their names. You fed this land with their blood. Now it's time you face them." The preacher fell to his knees, clutching his cross. Dear God in heaven, and the ground exploded upward. A column of black smoke shot from the soil, twisting into shapes. Faces, hands, the outlines of bodies writhing in silence. The air filled with the scent of iron and ash. William stumbled back, eyes wide. No, I did what I had to. They were nothing. The smoke surged toward him, cutting his words short. For an instant, Elias saw the faces of women and children in the dark fog, their mouths open in silent screams. They surrounded William, clutching at his coat, his throat, his soul. He screamed, a sound so raw it barely seemed human. His cane fell to the ground. His eyes bulged as black smoke poured into his mouth, his nose, his ears. His body convulsed, twisted, and for a moment Elias thought he saw fire in his father's eyes. Then the flames burst outward. The preacher fell backward, his Bible catching fire. The overseers fled, stumbling into the fields. Elias shielded Hattie with his arm as the ruined barn erupted into light, red and orange, like the gates of hell had opened beneath their feet. Through the blaze, William's figure writhed, screaming not in pain but in rage. His voice thundered through the smoke, echoing across the fields. "This land is mine!" Then came silence. The fire snuffed itself out in an instant, leaving only the faint glow of embers and the sickly sweet smell of burned flesh. Where William Chamberlain had stood, only a heap of ash and a single object remained. His gold signet ring, half melted, engraved with the initials W.C. Elias, dropped to his knees. The ledger slipped from his hand, pages scattering into the wind. The preacher crawled forward, his face pale as bone. "What have we witnessed?" he whispered. Elias didn't answer. He was staring at the ring, the way the firelight caught it, how it gleamed faintly, as if something still lived inside it. Hattie knelt beside him, her voice trembling. "He's gone." "But they're not." Elias turned to her slowly. The wind around them carried whispers, softer now, almost mournful. "No," he said quietly. They're not. He closed his eyes, feeling the ground hum beneath him like a living thing. The land that his father had claimed for power had become a grave that would never rest. And from far away, somewhere beyond the fields, thunder rolled again, though the sky was clear. The house was silent except for the crackle of wind through broken glass. Smoke still lingered in the halls, long after the barn had turned to ash. Elias Chamberlain moved through the ruins of his father's study, his face grey with exhaustion and soot. Every breath carried the scent of charred wood and old guilt. The plantation was dying, yet something unseen was still alive, whispering, shifting, watching. On the old desk, half buried under blackened papers, lay a leather-bound journal. Its spine was cracked, its corners curled from fire, but the initials were still visible. H.C. Henry Chamberlain. His father, the man who had built this empire of cruelty with trembling hands and righteous lies. Elias hesitated before touching it. The air around the journal felt different, colder, as if the book itself exhaled. He opened it slowly. The first pages were unreadable, words swallowed by fire. But deeper inside, fragments survived, confessions scrawled in uneven ink, half prayers, half curses. He read them aloud under his breath, each word heavier than the last. They would not stay quiet. Even buried, they whispered through the floorboards. I thought the river would take their souls, but the land keeps them. The land remembers. The barn feeds them still. Elias froze. The barn feeds them. The words bled through the page like open wounds. He turned another sheet, the ink darker as though written in desperation. I took their tongues so they could not scream, but their silence screams louder in my sleep. The soil beneath my feet burns at night. They come to me as children, as mothers, as what I destroyed. God has turned his face. Elias's hands trembled. His father had known, not just about the murders, but about the curse, the restless dead bound to the land by his cruelty. The fire had not freed them. It had only given them shape. He turned another page, and this time his own name appeared. Elias must never learn. He carries the blood that binds the curse. If he sees the barn's truth, he will inherit it. The fire will not end with me. A knock echoed through the room, slow, hollow, like someone tapping on wood from far away. Elias looked up sharply. The door was open, the hallway empty. But the knock came again, 3 times, from the direction of the burnt barn. He stepped outside, the moon thin and red as blood. The field still smoked, and the air shimmered with heat that shouldn't have been there. The barn was gone. Only the stone foundation remained, glowing faintly in the dark. But someone stood at its edge. A girl. The same girl who had knocked on his door days before, her eyes wide with grief and defiance. Her dress was torn, her hands covered in soot. "You found it," she whispered. "You found what he hid." Elias stepped closer, his heart hammering. "Who are you?" The girl tilted her head. "You know my name. You said it once when you were little. Mama used to tell me about you. Said you were the kind one." He searched her face and saw it then. The resemblance, the eyes, the curve of the jaw. "No," he murmured. "That's not possible." "She was your mother too," the girl said softly. He made sure no one ever knew. The truth hit Elias like a knife. The plantation's secret sin ran deeper than murder. It was blood. His father had not just enslaved women. He had fathered children in them, then buried the evidence under his barn. The girl before him was his sister. "He killed her," she said, voice trembling. "Killed my mama when she tried to run. And now he burns with her." The wind rose suddenly, carrying the scent of fire again. The ashes from the barn began to stir, swirling into the air, forming faint silhouettes. Women's faces, eyes hollow and glowing. Elias stumbled back, clutching the journal to his chest. "They're not gone," the girl said. "They wait for you to write the rest, to tell the truth." The journal burned in his hands, but he didn't drop it. He opened a blank page and began to write, the ink bleeding fast as if the paper drank his fear. He wrote everything, his father's sins, the graves, the fire, the curse. But as he wrote, the whispers grew louder, closer. The girl stepped back, her face fading into the smoke. "Finish it," she said, "or they'll finish you." And then she was gone. Elias wrote until his hand cramped, until the candle guttered out. When dawn came, he found the last page still damp with ink. The words twisted on the page as though alive. He read them and understood. The curse was not his father's alone. It had chosen him next. In the distance, the ashes moved again, rising like a dark wave toward the house. Elias looked out the window and whispered, "Then I'll write until it ends." He dipped his pen again. The ink turned red. The night air hung thick with the scent of rain, though the sky was clear. The moon was hidden behind a veil of grey clouds, and the world felt caught between breath and silence. Elias Chamberlain stood on the front steps of the old house, his father's burned journal pressed to his chest. The paper inside seemed to pulse faintly, as though it were alive, or remembering. The land itself had grown strange. The fields, once golden and cruelly beautiful, now lay in ruins, black earth scattered with bone-white roots. The oaks bent toward the ground, their branches creaking in voices that almost formed words. He could feel something beneath the soil, moving slowly, breathing. The earth had become restless. Inside the house, the mirrors had begun to cloud. He'd noticed it hours earlier. Reflections fading, faces appearing behind his own. Some were women he recognized from portraits in the hall, long dead. Others, faces he did not know, faces of those who had never been painted. He lit a single candle and began reading again from the journal's last surviving pages. His father's handwriting was uneven now, the lines slanted, desperate. The graves cannot hold them. The ground rejects what was done. The barn was their prison, the fire their key. When the moon darkens, they will walk again. Not for vengeance, but for what was promised. Blood will balance blood. Elias set the book down slowly. Blood will balance blood. The phrase echoed through him like a curse. He looked out across the fields. In the far distance, the old graveyard slumped behind the barn's ruins, unmarked mounds barely visible in the darkness. For generations, his family had denied their existence, calling it a vegetable patch, a field of rest. But now it stirred like something waking from a long sleep. A sound came then, soft at first, like rainfall on dry leaves. Then louder, a rhythmic thudding, like hundreds of fists striking the ground from below. Elias's candle flickered. The window panes rattled. He stepped outside, boots sinking into the wet earth, and froze. The soil was moving. Across the fields, small mounds began to rise and fall, as if the earth itself were breathing. Then came the first crack, a burst of soil and a pale arm reaching through. Another beside it. Then another. Elias staggered back, heart pounding. Dozens of shapes began clawing their way out of the ground, thin, skeletal, their clothes still clinging in tatters. They did not look like the living or the dead. They looked like memories given form. Their eyes glowed faintly, ember-like. Their mouths did not move, yet he could hear them. Whispers carried on the wind. You wrote it down. You opened the door. Elias dropped the journal, backing away as one of the figures straightened. A tall woman with braided hair and hollow eyes. She stared at him with recognition. The same girl's mother. The woman his father had killed, he whispered, "I'm sorry." She stepped forward. The other figures followed, not rushing, not attacking, but circling him, enclosing him. The air grew heavy with the smell of soil and smoke. Their whispers overlapped until the sound became a low hum, like a heartbeat. He clutched his chest and fell to his knees. "I tried to make it right," he gasped. "I burned it. I buried him. I wrote the truth." The woman knelt beside him, her hand ghosting over his cheek. "The truth does not set you free," she said. "It binds you to the land. You are his son." Lightning flared without thunder, bathing the fields in white light. Elias saw then that the grave stretched farther than he'd ever known, hundreds of mounds, maybe more. The entire plantation was built upon a graveyard. The earth trembled again, and the house behind him began to groan. Wood split, window shattered. The grand Chamberlain home, built on generations of blood, was sinking. The foundation cracked, as if the ground had finally grown tired of carrying its weight. He turned to run toward it, but the spirits did not move aside. The girl from before appeared at the edge of the circle, her eyes glowing faintly like coals. "You can't go back," she said softly. "It's already gone." Elias looked behind him, and she was right. The mansion was collapsing, one wing at a time, Flames burst from the roof where the lightning had struck. The portraits of his ancestors burned in their frames, the paint melting like flesh. He screamed, not from fear, but from understanding. The curse wasn't about vengeance. It was about justice. Slow, patient, divine justice that had been buried too long. He turned back to the spirits, his voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" The girl stepped closer. "Your name," she said. "Your blood. Your silence. He took from us everything, even our stories. You must give them back." He stared at her, breathing hard. Then slowly he nodded. He picked up the burned journal and tore out the last page. The ink shimmered in the dim light, letters twisting into new shapes. He took the pen from his pocket and dipped it into his own blood, a cut on his palm from the fall, and began to write across the page. "Here lies the truth of the Chamberlain land, built on bones fed by fire, ended by the hands of the forgotten." As the last word left the page, the wind stopped. The whispers fell silent. One by one, the spirits began to dissolve into smoke, their shapes fading into the dark. Only the girl remained. She smiled faintly. Now they can rest. Then she too vanished, leaving Elias alone in the still, smoking field. The house burned behind him. The graves lay open before him, and the night stretched endless and quiet. Elias dropped the journal into the firelight and whispered, "Let it be over." But as the flames consumed it, he noticed the ink did not burn. The pages turned black but never turned to ash. And from somewhere deep beneath the earth, a faint heartbeat continued to echo. The land was not done yet. The fire burned through the night, casting a red haze over the Chamberlain land. Ash fell like snow across the blackened fields. Elias stood barefoot in the dirt, his clothes scorched, the journal still clutched in his trembling hands. The house behind him groaned its final breath, each collapsing beam like the breaking of old bones. He could feel the curse pressing against his skin, a heavy, unseen weight that seemed to crawl into his veins. The whispers had quieted, but the silence that followed was worse. It wasn't peace. It was waiting. By dawn the flames had died. The land looked skeletal, stripped bare. Only the foundation of the mansion remained, stone and soot. Elias wandered among the ruins like a ghost, searching for something he could not name. He found it near what had once been the dining hall, a patch of ground that refused to burn. Beneath the ash lay a trapdoor he'd never seen before, sealed with rusted iron. Etched into the wood was the Chamberlain crest, a serpent coiled around a cross, dripping blood. His father's symbol. His hands shook as he pulled it open. The hinges screamed. A narrow staircase descended into blackness, colder than the morning air. For a long moment, Elias hesitated at the threshold. Then he took the lantern, still flickering weakly, and stepped down. The smell hit first, a mix of rot, damp wood, and something metallic like rusted chains. The walls were carved stone, slick with moisture. The deeper he went, the louder his heartbeat became, echoing through the tunnel like footsteps. At the bottom he found a chamber, small, circular, lined with wooden shelves. And upon those shelves were jars, dozens of them filled with dark liquid. Floating inside each were fragments, bones, locks of hair, teeth. Some labeled with initials, others simply marked with an X. Elias's lantern trembled in his grip. This was no cellar. This was a shrine. On the far wall hung a large painting, half burned but still visible. It showed his ancestors, 6 generations of Chamberlain men, standing before the plantation house, their hands resting proudly on a black ledger. Beneath it was a phrase written in faded Latin, "Sanguis Mane." The blood remains. He staggered backward, bile rising in his throat. His family hadn't just enslaved, murdered, and buried. They'd preserved. They'd kept trophies of their power, their control, their divine right. The blood curse wasn't metaphorical. It was real, deliberate, maintained by ritual. Then he saw something else, a smaller jar set apart from the rest. The label was smeared, but he could make out 2 letters, EC, his own initials. His hand reached out slowly, as if drawn by invisible threads. Inside the jar floated a single drop of blood, suspended and glowing faintly in the lamplight. He didn't understand until the whispers returned, faint but familiar. The blood remembers. He stumbled back, the jar nearly falling from his hand. His father had done this, prepared even him, his own son, as part of the inheritance. The curse didn't stop with William Chamberlain's death. It demanded continuation. Elias was its next vessel. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. "No," he whispered. "You can't have me." Not again, but the ground beneath him began to move. The jars rattled. The lantern flared, casting grotesque shadows that twisted into human forms. His father, his grandfather, generations of Chamberlains staring down at him with hollow eyes. William's voice broke through the chaos, echoing like thunder from all directions. "You cannot undo what built you, boy. Our blood made this land breathe. You kill it, you kill yourself." Elias's scream tore from his throat. "Then let it die." He grabbed the lantern and hurled it against the shelves. Flames erupted, glass shattered, and the jars burst open, spilling their dark contents across the floor. The fire climbed the walls, roaring to life like a living thing. The chamber filled with smoke and the stench of burning history. The spirits wailed, not from pain, but from release. Elias stumbled upward through the collapsing staircase, coughing, eyes burning. Behind him, the chamber exploded in a burst of red light, shaking the earth beneath his feet. He fell into the daylight, gasping, as smoke poured from the open ground like the breath of the dead. He lay there for what felt like hours, staring up at the grey sky. Then, through the haze, he saw movement, a figure standing at the edge of the field. It was Hattie. Her face was streaked with soot, but her eyes were clear, steady. In her hands, she held the torn page from the ledger, the one with her mother's name. Behind her stood the boy Nathaniel, clutching her skirt. They had survived. Elias pushed himself up, every muscle trembling. "It's done," he rasped. "It's over." Hattie shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "It's never over. Not until the land forgives the blood that fed it." He looked back at the smoldering ruins. The fire was dying, but the ground beneath still pulsed faintly, like a slow heartbeat. He knew she was right. "The curse lives in us," he said. "In every name that carries it." Hattie stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "Then end it." Elias understood. His father had sacrificed others to preserve his power. Elias would have to do the opposite, sacrifice himself to end it. The weight of it filled him, cold and certain. He turned toward the ashes of the mansion and knelt, pressing his palm into the earth. The soil was warm, trembling softly beneath his hand as if listening. He whispered a prayer, not to God, but to the ones his family had wronged. "Take what's owed. Let their blood rest through mine." The ground shuddered. A deep, resonant hum filled the air. Hattie screamed his name, but Elias didn't move. The soil beneath him began to sink, swallowing his hand, then his arm. He looked up once more, meeting her eyes. "Tell them," he said, voice faint. "Tell them what we did. Don't let it be forgotten." Then the earth took him. The ground sealed itself as if it had never opened. The tremors stopped. The air grew still. Hattie fell to her knees, clutching the ledger page to her chest. The boy beside her whispered, "Is he gone?" She looked toward the horizon where dawn was breaking, soft and red as blood. "No," she said quietly. "He gave it back." And as the sun rose over the Chamberlain land for the first time in generations, the soil stopped bleeding. But far beneath the surface, the earth still whispered, a single word, faint and steady: "Remember."